So this is an All Things Memoir, which is an offshoot of our Memoir Nation podcast, where we cover stories that are of interest in the world of memoir. And we're doubling up on this story for both All Things Memoir and for our book trend, because this story is something we really want to get out in a broader way. So Grant, I texted you about doing a little bit of coverage on the book Memoir, Careless People by Sarah Wynn-Williams, because in late May, early June, Sarah was barred from speaking at an event where she was scheduled to be on a panel at the Hay Festival in Wales. And what happened there and in the aftermath, in my opinion, is so extraordinary that I wanted to make sure our listeners know about it. So we're going to talk about it here, and we're also going to talk about it in the show. So basically, all things memoir and trend, let's do it.
Yeah, this is quite a story, complete with a major backfire. And for people who haven't heard of Careless People, it's a memoir, but it's also an expose. And I did a little research into it, and the title is absolutely perfect because it comes from The Great Gatsby, when Nick Carraway, the narrator, calls Tom Buchanan and Daisy careless people, because they're so rich and privileged that they can be careless, they can treat others like playthings, and then they literally get away with murder. And I think that applies in the case of Facebook. In this case, the careless people are at Facebook. Sarah worked for Facebook from 2011 to 2017. She was director of global public policy there. But she was fired after she complained about her boss, Joel Kaplan, for sexual harassment. She writes about this as, retaliation in the book, though, of course, Facebook, now Meta, has a competing account, which is that Sarah was fired for her own, quote, unquote, poor performance and toxic behavior. The hardcover came out in March 2025. The paperback isn't even out yet, but it's scheduled for release date in January of 2027. And as soon as it was published, Meta obtained an order to block Wynn-Williams from promoting her book. So when she was scheduled to speak at this festival in May, Meta filed a sanctions motion saying that she would be violating the order if she were to speak. So she went anyway. Kudos to her. She went on stage and she did not speak, nod, or do anything the entire time. She just sat there, and at the end of the event, she got a standing ovation.
I love this. I really love this. And she also sold a lot of books. And this is the part that I kind of find extraordinary, because I wanted to share a personal anecdote, because I, of course, heard about this story, the book, when it first came out. I had purchased Careless People as an audiobook last year. I had started to listen to it, and then not for any particular reason. Honestly, I just stopped, as one does sometimes. I think I was 3 chapters in, and it wasn't at all bad, but part of me was like, why do I want to read this account of Facebook and how shitty these people are? I already know how shitty these people are. And so I just kind of let it linger there in my audio account. But then I heard about this order, which amounts to a gag order and censorship and canceling all bundled up into one. And it prompted me to go back and start listening. So take that, right? Finished the book just a few days ago. And Grant, I mean, I've just been reeling because it is so, so damning. And now I just really want to evangelize it to everyone and have everyone go read it so that everyone can see just how bad it really is.
Yeah, there are so many things to say here because the act of censorship is obviously very profound. And I know that this silencing mirrors some of the behaviors Wynn-Williams, accuses Facebook of in her book. So that tracks, even as Meta is accusing her of being toxic, which of course you can see through that strategy, kind of reminds me of a certain world leader we know who accuses everyone else of his own bad behaviors and then sues them. So Brooke, I know you picked the book back up in response to this story, and then it sold 140,000 books just across the UK alone. And you mentioned to me that you checked BookScan, and again, there was a big spike in sales in the aftermath of the event. And the book had been consistently selling about 300 to 400 copies a week, but then it spiked to 800 and 1,700 in the weeks following this event. And I love that success. And that's just the hardcover. So that's not accounting for audiobooks and ebook sales.
Yeah, that is right. And the spike in sales, Grant, is such sweet payback, because Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook think that they can just silence someone because they have the money and they're powerful. And you and I were talking about this before we came on, just this whole notion that people like this think they don't have to play by the rules, because they
Mm-hmm.
don't in their life. But I think that this is exactly why, something like this, which is essentially a whistleblower book, really needs to be
Right.
supported. But on the flip side of this, it's kind of classic, that when you try to smother something, it just ends up bringing more attention to it. So that was the upshot of the event.
I love poetic justice, poetic
Yeah.
irony. Watch out, all those old rules, hubris, they apply, I think. But I want to get into the book a little bit, and I was super interested in it because I have my own Facebook stories. Starting with, I knew a Facebook executive who was one of the first hires, and when I was executive director at National Novel Writing Month, she basically advised me to grow at all costs. And she told me a lot of Facebook stories with this deep admiration that, that all growth is good. But Facebook grew in large part because of how their algorithm created divisiveness. That was by design. And Zuckerberg and Facebook in general, they call themselves a community, but they're not a community. They haven't really truly been a community because they're really a rapacious business. And I didn't want to build a rapacious business at NaNoWriMo. I wanted to build a community. So I just cringe when I hear Mark Zuckerberg call Facebook a community when he doesn't do anything to truly nourish that community, because a community, like a garden, takes tending. So I wasn't surprised when this book came out because, the fish rots from the head down, as they say. I am curious, though, Brooke, why you would say this book is worth reading. Why are we suggesting people read it? Because like you said at the beginning, we kind of feel like we know how evil they are, but they're more evil.
I know. When I finished the book, I was like, oh my God, the book was terrible. And my wife was like, it was terrible. And I was like, well, the content inside of it was terrible. The book is very well written. A great book with terrible content. It's a book that makes you feel complicit, first of all, right? That I'm on Facebook gives me some more pause than it did before. It's the same way I feel about Amazon, by the way, and really, really almost eliminated my Amazon buying, but I still do sometimes buy at Whole Foods because it is 4 blocks from my house. And so it's that same feeling like, okay, I'm participating in something that I don't support. And the more we're conscious of that, the better choices that we make. I also think the book is worth reading because it shows a mindset and an entitlement that really runs rampant among tech companies, and especially ones like Facebook. And so we're talking about all of the AI companies, of course, fall into this bucket. They're just so wealthy, so disconnected from the damage that they're doing in the world. You mentioned Careless people and where that comes from, The Great Gatsby. And of course, it's very much that. But the whole premise of the book is they do not care. And so Sarah Wynn-Williams is offering up these very damning things that Facebook did in their expansion at all costs, like you say. She dedicates a lot of time to showing how Facebook was growing in countries where they did not have anyone on the ground in those countries, didn't have proper translation tools, didn't know what was happening, but meanwhile knew that their platform was inciting riots and worse. And the worst story is Myanmar. And people surely know what happened there because it was in the news a lot at the time. But, time passes and you forget. So, rereading about what happened in Myanmar during that time is so upsetting. Like, I can't even talk about it here, but people should read the book because American companies and American governments are responsible for rape, torture, murder, in foreign countries especially. But this goes from Facebook's expansion into Myanmar and just all of the repercussions of what happened there. But it also is Elon Musk and Trump and what they single-handedly did in getting rid of USAID. I looked up estimates that say that 760,000 people have died in Africa as a result of this action in the 1 year since we pulled out. The numbers are too big and the places are too remote for us to be adequately enraged. But I think when you read a book like Careless People, you can see something like what I liked about it is that she made it much more personal, right? And you can have this profound disconnect, but then if you read the story and you just go like, oh my gosh, we're talking about humanity and just this quashing. And she does write a lot about Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, and then these other higher up leaders, Joel Kaplan and Elliot Charge. So I don't know. I guess my feeling is if you're on Facebook, you need to read the book. It does not want to be there. But of course, I haven't deleted my account. But I had already been using the platform way less than I used to, in part because it is just infuriating.
Super hard information to take in. And this is why, we want to spotlight this book. And as I mentioned earlier, Facebook is all about growth or has been all about growth, not care for community. And they hide so many of their atrocities behind this idea that they're building a community and bringing people together. And I remember my personal story, another one, is that I remember the years right after Trump was first elected. And the people who were at the top of my feed day after day after day were consistently people who held opposite views than me. It was like we were roosters and they were tossing us in the bin to fight each other. And that was not by accident. They knew they could maximize engagement through conflict and divisiveness, just as they knew they could maximize growth by designing the platform around addiction. They consciously did that. That's actually in their records. So they're just like a tobacco company. And fortunately, there's starting to be some class action lawsuits against them, just as there were with tobacco companies because of the harm they've done, especially to kids. But, as you said, Brooke, we're not advocating for getting off Facebook because we're both still on there. It's still a valuable tool to me. It can be a town square. And honestly, I've had a lot of beautiful connections that have happened on the platform. I'm very grateful for that part of it. And I appreciate things about it. But I was surprised when you told me just how revealing information was in this book and that it hadn't got the attention when it landed, because I had actually forgotten about it when you mentioned it. And, it got some attention, but, books like Liz Gilbert's book or Belle Burden's book, they've gotten much more attention in their memoirs than Sarah Wynn-Williams. And yet this is the book that everyone really needs to read in terms of social consequences it shines light on. And you're right, Brooke, that if we were really able to reckon with our complicity in all of this, what would that look like? How would things be different if everyone who profoundly disagreed with Meta's way of being in the world just got off the platform, quit shopping at Amazon, all of that? That would be such a good speculative fiction book, how collective action could change the course of things. I hope it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'd read that book.
Yeah.
I could use some good utopian fiction right about now. Yeah, and it's hard because, here we are sitting here talking about this, and yet we're not getting off Facebook. And it's like, it's challenging because like you mentioned, I mean, I have so many connections there in this place of great visibility. But I also think it's important to finally note that Sarah Wynn-Williams makes some pretty disturbing allegations about Sheryl Sandberg. Sandberg has not publicly commented on any of it. She must have kept very detailed notes of her time, and the things are just like very specific and very bizarre. Sandberg basically at one point told one of her subordinates to go and spend as much money as she could on lingerie for herself and for Sandberg. And then there was like this very uncomfortable, sexually overt exchange about it, which Sarah was privy to. And so she shares that in the book. So there's just like sexual inappropriateness, sexual harassment, the carelessness, the callousness, the getting ahead and growth, like you said, at the expense of other people's literal lives. And then just the absolute remove from humanity that would allow someone to behave this way in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. And the book's so important because we need to understand this moment we're in, where our American corporations are doing so much harm, and the bar keeps getting raised for them to do more and more harm. And hopefully a book like this opens our eyes to it. And then hopefully we can begin to see a sea change somewhere, somehow. And I'm interested in comparisons to the past. And a lot of people have compared our current moment to 18th century France, which seems appropriate. That was when Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were both murdered by guillotine during the French Revolution. But this divide between the haves and the have-nots, getting bigger. And then the excesses of the royal court, where Marie Antoinette was spending lavishly while the people suffered. There's a part in Careless People where Mark Zuckerberg is buying up land in Hawaii and literally suing the native people who've owned it for generations to claim the rights of this land.
Yeah, I will say that people do hate him, though. Like, I saw a recent Instagram reel where he was talking about raising his own cows and feeding them beer and macadamia nuts to fatten them up. And there were like more than 2,000 comments, and I scrolled through like hundreds of them, and there was not one positive comment, and some of them were bordering on murderous rage. So he really does elicit something with his public image, which is similar to Bezos and all of these guys. But you know what? I don't think they care.
I think they gave up caring a while ago because they're careless people.
Yeah.
Well, we hope you'll buy and read the book, and we will see you next time, everyone. So thanks for listening to Memoir Nation. Come visit our community at memoirnation.com. We have lots of fun stuff going on, from live monthly readings to monthly classes to accountability groups and so much more. So sign up. We have membership levels that start at free, and you get more and more and more the higher you go up. So thanks, everyone.
See you next time.